Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to sort of segue off some of the stories going around about Eliza Blue, and I don't know how true or otherwise any of them are, and I haven't done a vast amount of research into that particular person. I've noticed some of Jeremy from the Quartering, some of his videos. He seems to be locked into a bit of a story angle or story arc rather about Eliza Blue and some of the things she's doing, involvement with Twitter and the like. One of the things that's come out of all this toing and froing, and I've got no means of verifying it in the case of the people involved in that story arc with Jeremy, Eliza Blue, and the others, how many women who are executive recruiters who either are or have been hookers. I was sort of stunned when I first found out about it or came across it. There was and I'll give you some examples here and go to some sort of personal stories, I guess, that I saw up close. In fact, I'll start with that one. This is a guy who's this guy. He owns he's just sleazy as fuck, this guy, but he owns a what you would call a sales persuasion business, where he sells the ability to get to top level executives, whether in government or in the private sector, and to either charm them or compromise them with hookers. That's he's not fussy about the gender or anything. He'll supply anything, whether it be interesting or outrageously perverse or whatever the case may be. So you can go to him and say, look, I want to win government business, or I want to get this company to buy my product or something like that. That's the sort of basis. You go to him and he'll make sure of it, and he'll simply keep at it until he meets the I don't know, the most outrageous sexual fantasies in this case for people, and he delivers that and gets them then to agree to do business. Now, sometimes these hookers that he uses end up being sort of hired, if you like, or acquired directly by the rich and influential businessman or public servant or politician or whatever it might be. So that's what this guy sold. Now, it wasn't immediately apparent. Another company that my firm was doing business with was finding they were having a bit of a struggle getting into a certain organization, and this is many tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment at very high profit margins. So the amount of money, if you've got to spend $1 million getting in the door, who cares? Because you can get so much business down the track. Well, that was their attitude anyway. So we were doing business with them, and the guy, the sort of point man on this, introduced me. They were a little bit uncertain whether or not I would give them what they wanted in terms of pricing and additional services. So they wanted to rope my company, or me as the then sort of head guy in the area, wanted to rope me in to make sure. So they brought me into it thinking that, well, we're not quite sure about him, whether he'll do what we want when we want it. He's been independently minded, this guy. So we have to make sure we own him. And the best way to do that, or most effective way of doing that, is to compromise him or provide sexual services. Now, I was probably at the wrong age, and if I wanted hot babes, I could go out and get them pretty much. So it wasn't like I was short on action, or if I wanted more of it, that I couldn't have got it. So it was kind of not as an appealing prospect as it might be to some older, less attractive or whatever person that can't really get laid, or certainly couldn't get any hot babe if they wanted. So the only way they're going to get hot babes is through some sort of mechanism like this. So these guys did this business, and they I didn't go along with. They tried all sorts of little tricks, but the hottest babe they had, or one that they thought was the hottest babe, I didn't think she was that hot. She had a bad attitude to start with. Was, I thought, too scrawny, and just didn't do anything for me. So they tried a number of times. In fact, a few times I hadn't realised that they were actually putting it on, but they anyway. The thing was that this guy who had this thing going, he pretended that it was a recruitment agency, and he used that as a front. So that was like the brass plaque out on the front door, but in fact it was just a place to run hookers to influence wealthy or powerful decision makers at all levels. So that was what he was up to. So that was kind of interesting. I knew a lady who owned again an executive recruitment agency, and I don't know how I ended up there. I think someone at the place where I work said, "Look, if you want to look for people, these guys are really good. Go to them." So I spoke to her, the owner. She invited me to meet her and have a coffee and a bagel and whatever. So I was doing that, and she said, "Well, come in the office, have a look." And I was surprised that, other than one guy, that they were all young girls that didn't like. Why would you have a 23-year-old, girl in a short dress and a tight outfit being an executive recruiter when they've never actually had a job? That doesn't seem to fit to me. Been having my business hat on, and then it kind of became apparent, and she sort of admitted it effectively. Said, "Look, if we've got to rely on skills and ability and capability, then there's 100 other executive recruitment agencies out there. So how do we separate ourselves? This is how we do it. These girls are there to supply sexual services on demand, and in return, we get all their executive recruitment requirements, and we do very well out of it. They do very well out of it. It all appears legit on the surface, and so on. So that was her. They did quite well out of it, and made a lot of money. And I didn't realise, she mentioned, do you know, Billy Bob? She's lecturing me how widespread this is. Do you know how many executive recruitment agencies? That's where the big bucks are. How many of those are really fronts for prostitute, or where the girls are openly being hookers in order to get the business? And I knew an executive recruiter at a place. I was back at the time I was dating sort of her best buddy, and she was okay looking, I guess. I don't know. I wouldn't have thought she'd have been able to get, but she targeted rich old men, and got there, and then got them to use her as an executive recruiter, and that was the payment for providing sexual services. She led an extravagant lifestyle, this girl, and so she was constantly on the lookout for wealthy men she could compromise. Here's another one where there's the board of directors of a large company, which is in Australia. They had this, I don't know what you call it. See, she was a sort of a professional courtesan, I suppose you call it. And really the men, all the men on the board of directors kind of shared her around. So she was kept in a very lavish apartment and put on a very lavish salary, driving a Porsche and overseas trips, expensive overseas trips. But she kind of had to fuck all the directors whenever they wanted it, and so she was an on-staff courtesan, I guess. Anyway, she got a little bit older, and repayment for her services sort of rendered. she said, "Well, I'll become an executive recruiter, and all your executive recruitment needs you can put through me, and that'll be." And she maybe knew all the bodies were buried or knew too many secrets, so they decided to look after her. But all she'd ever done really was be a hooker all her life. So according to her, she was qualified because she understood the needs of men and their egos and all that sort of stuff, and that she perceived eminently qualified her for this the executive recruitment role. I would dispute that. I mean, she was a moron, but I didn't think she looked that hot, so I don't know how she ended up getting this job of being passed around and paid the big bucks for doing it. But anyway, so there's another one. This was again, one of the CEOs of a big company. He sort of found a hooker that he liked, outrageously bad attitude, and this sort of thing. Not bad looking. I mean, she really put serious time in the gym and made sure that she was kept herself in really good condition. But again, she set herself up as the executive recruiter for the company, and we were subcontracting to another company who was doing work in there, and we ended up being roped into some of the policy development type work, and so we ended up in an interview that she was conducting for hiring some executive or other, whatever it was, and she was screwing the CEO, and she made sure that everyone understood that. Hey, I'm screwing the CEO. Any of you go or whisper from me on the pillow talk, and any one of you guys is out of a job the minute I say so. And so she had the other executives in the company terrified. She was a real tyrant and a despot. So and I was one of the people at the meeting, and she was if they said a word out of place or they asked a question or did something, she'd glare at them with this snot-nosed teenager glare. Had them shaking in their boots. But she was that's all she was. She was the fucking hooker for the CEO. But somehow she managed to wangle herself. So this seems to be a path that all hookers dream of, the executive level, like higher class hookers, is they want to somehow semi-legitimize their behavior. And so they see executive recruitment. I'm a people person. There's no doubt about that. And they want to have legitimize their hooker type existence and morph it into being executive recruiters. So it's interesting how widespread that is, and I don't know why there appears to be a direct path from one to the other. And some of them do exceptionally well out of it. There was one of these hookers. She managed to become like a permanent hooker for this captain of industry who'd been beaten head to toe with the ugly stick, and so she would have seemed to be stunning beauty in his perspective, and so he sort of kept her as kept her on staff, and when he died, she was provided for quite generously. She got a nice house out of it, and a lump sum of money and all this sort of thing. So she'll never need to work again. And just sort of on a sidebar to this, there's a girl I went to school with. I mentioned her in videos previously, and she's in a couple of my classes at school. I got on okay with her and everything, and sometimes we'd end up sitting together in lessons and having a chat. But I never thought she was that hot. She's all right, but I never thought she was that hot. I wouldn't have screamed to get my hands on her or anything like that. I noticed that she had that something, because I noticed the male teachers seemed to go all weird when she was around. So she must have had something there that affected men that really had not much effect on me. So she kind of liked that, and she later on, sort of as the years went by and we didn't necessarily keep in touch, we bumped into each other. She said, at least I can get an honest sort of answer out of you, and you're not you know, you're not like sort of all these other men that are trying to jump on me and fuck me all the time. And she seemed to appreciate that. But anyway, she ended up, she wasn't very bright and was incredibly lazy, but she decided that her life could take an uptick if she used men, and she offered herself sexual services in return for rewards. And she noticed this, that men, you know, the bosses would try and fire her because she was useless, but if she flirted with them and intimated that she would provide sexual favors, not only did she keep a job, but she'd get promotions and gifts and all sorts of shit. So she kind of worked it out that she could either lead a life of sort of hand to mouth, you know, misery by being a receptionist, or she could turn her talents, as she would see it, to making some serious money. So I hadn't seen her for a few years, and I bumped into her one day. This company is trying to headhunt me, and they tapped me on the shoulder and taken me out for a nice lunch and all this sort of thing. And I was talking to the CEO, and as I was coming out the building, she was walking up the steps as I was walking down. And so, hey, how you doing? And so we ducked off for a quick cup of coffee, you know, catching up at old times and that sort of thing. And she was this CEO that I just was trying to hire me. She was his sort of permanent mistress, and that's what she did. She just attached herself to rich and powerful men, and then demanded serious money. And I remember saying to her, like, well, what if they don't give you the sort of money you want? Well, fuck them, then I'll find someone else. And she said there was almost an endless supply of rich and powerful but insecure men who couldn't get women, you know, by any means other than throwing their money around. And that surprised me a bit, that you know, surely some of these men must have been able to acquire you know, girlfriends or wives through their charm, and so they must have had some charm to get where they got to go, but apparently not, or at least enough of them couldn't. So she made money out of that, and this guy had her set up in one of the ritziest, swankiest hotels in Sydney, in the penthouse apartment, no less, and that's where she lived with you know, all food and you know, room service supplied. You know, she lived on lobster and champagne and caviar and so on, and had a fancy car to drive. Had the, you know, whenever he went overseas or traveled interstate, she would go with him, and again supplying sexual services. But you know, the stuff she gathered, these men that she'd been hanging out with, they were giving her you know, apartments. Now, when you're worth $100 million, giving you know, somebody $1 million apartment or whatever is like, it's no big deal at the end of the day. So she had a portfolio of shares and investments and apartments and so on, and she was, you know, several times richer than I was, and I busted my ass for good money. Like, I'm not complaining, I was paid well, but she was well in excess of my income earning and all the benefits she got, which were of course tax free, which made a difference. But nonetheless, so this is an interesting thing about hookers and women executive recruiters. I've told that men do it as well, that there's gay men that use this, but we use the same sort of business model, if you will. But that's something there. So it's a bit of a backstory around some of what's going on there. You've been with Taskless today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.